G'day and welcome to Crank the Third. This is the podcast in which we explore the entrepreneurial and creative side of life post 50. Believe in what you're doing. Own your voice. Take some risks. Put yourself out there. Document and share your professional journey. Peel off some layers to reveal the real you. When you've been in the business and professional trenches for some 3+ decades, you have heaps of skills and stories and experiences to draw upon. So use these to your advantage. Build out your narrative and communicate your story and your business with confidence. Experiment. Try new ways to enhance your credibility and extend the reach of your voice in the marketplace. These are all topics and talking points I cover off with my guest today. It's a ripper conversation. I'm sure you'll get a lot out of it. You will be inspired. But so let's dive in. My guest today is Jackie Goddard. She is the founder of Power to Speak. This is a coaching business dedicated to empowering individuals, particularly authors and entrepreneurs and leaders, to communicate confidently and effectively. It's important in all areas of life, of course. G'day, Jackie. Welcome to the show. What were you doing 15 years ago?
Wow, 15 years ago, I was running a youth theatre for our local arts centre and running Lambda classes, if you know what that is, speaking verse and prose, teaching young people, or not teaching, but putting them through sort of piano exams, but for speaking. If you
piano exams for speaking, haven't heard that before.
Yeah, but those sort of graded things. So yeah, I was doing a lot of work with kids. And
so you're obviously doing, coaching and teaching and training's been a big part of your life. I want to get you on the show. You've been on the former show. This is now called Crank the Third. It was called Reputation Revolution. We've had you on Reputation Revolution before from a personal branding point of view, and we'll touch on that today. But I've watched your journey. You live on the south coast of of England, and you're doing terrific things. We do belong to the same community. It's an online community, and I'm obviously in Melbourne. But walk us through what you're doing now, just a little bit about what Power to Speak is, and then I want to break open the types of things you've had to do, challenges to overcome, to really build. I think you've got a kind of like a portfolio type career now. You've got multiple streams of income and building a nice little micro business.
Yeah, I like that portfolio. Obviously, I from my art school days, I always loved walking around with my portfolio. Power to Speak now, I like to say my job is to get people excited about speaking to an audience, because so many people are so afraid of doing that, of actually standing in front of an audience and speaking, and I think mainly because they care about what they're doing. Lots of business owners are doing what they're passionate about, and actually there's some skin in the game when they have to stand up. They don't want to be judged or make a fool of themselves. So I pivoted from teaching drama and teaching actors into teaching and working with business owners and leaders, authors, whoever might need that kind of thing, just to getting in front of an audience during lockdown, really. So that's where the pivot happened, because I couldn't get into spaces with people and I was talking to people online. But I love it. I much prefer it to working with kids, definitely. Working with adults is lovely because I can actually see the transformation and the sort of the building of confidence and getting them to sort of own their own stories and step into themselves, really. It's really, really rewarding.
And you have, going back even further, you had a background in theatre.
I did, yep. I trained as a fashion designer because I was too scared to go to drama school when I left school. My confidence had hit rock bottom while I was a teenager, as I think it quite often does for lots of kids. And so I went to my second love, which was fashion and art and all of that. So I did that first. And from that thought, don't like this. I'll move over into theatre. Did costume for the Royal Shakespeare Company for a little while. And while I was there, thought, no, the hankering after being actually in front of that audience rather than behind them was too much. So I went off to drama school eventually.
So
And
you've
yeah,
pulled together a lot of different skills, and I think when we've been in business for a number of decades, that we look back and we look at all the skills that we do have, and the connections we've made, and the experiences we've had, and it can become quite a compelling package of things. I guess the problem sometimes is finding out, even later in life sometimes, what am I going to do? What am I going to do next? Where do I go from here? What's going on? With you, it was the pandemic, obviously, that was a catalyst for you to go, would I say, full-time into coaching? Would that be the phrase?
well, realizing that's what I was. That's what I'd been doing all those years. I knew as soon as we were sort of locked down and I had that time to think, because I'd been, like many people, you get on a treadmill of work and family and paying bills and all of that. And there's no time to stop and think about what it is you want to do next. It's just, that's what you're doing. So the lockdown for me was just an opportunity to rethink and reevaluate what it was that I did. And I knew that I didn't want to go back to doing that.
Yep.
I knew that there was something else I wanted to do, that I wanted to come out of the pandemic doing something that I really wanted to do rather than I was kind of having to do. So it was a wonderful opportunity, really.
So the theme for today is really about taking risks and putting yourself out there. And it's interesting because people say, well, Jackie's a speaker. She puts herself out there all the time. It's not that easy, though. And when we say putting yourself out there, that's the natural thing is, speaking or performing or even putting yourself out on social media. Walk us through, because you have been a behind the scenes person anyway, and a teacher and a trainer. So even though you're teaching people to put yourself out there, and clearly you can go out and speak, and that's not an issue. Talk us through about the journey you've had in terms of coming to grips with, this is who I am and this is what I put out in the world. Because when you're running your own business, of course, if you're not out there doing stuff and making connections and building the network and putting out content and speaking and attending events, nothing much happens. That's a long question, but really I just want to dig in a little bit about, because, I've read your stuff for a long time, and I know that now even in your newsletters, you're telling personal stories, you're putting yourself out there, you're peeling off layers. Walk us through your thinking around all that and the mindset.
Wow, see, that's a huge one, isn't it, really? Because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I hadn't have gone through what I've been through in the last 30 years at least. It's been a progression, as you say, as everybody has this kind of journey. And what I've realized going through, I don't know, if you want to dig deep, when I was 28 and I was working at the Royal Shakespeare Company as a dresser, I had been hankering after becoming an actor for a long time. But again, confidence, didn't know how I could do it, didn't think I was good enough. And then aged 28, 5 weeks before my wedding, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I was in hospital 5 weeks before my wedding, had the lump removed, had another operation, came out looking at 6 months worth of chemotherapy, radiotherapy. And there's nothing quite like facing your own mortality. To go, oh, do you know what? I think I'm actually going to do that. I'm actually going to go and do what I want to do. I mean, there was a catalyst as well while I was at the Royal Shakespeare Company of watching an actor simulating sex with an actress under a sheet on a mattress. And I'm sure I must have told you this story in one of the other incarnations, because it was a big light bulb penny drop moment for me when he came to the changing room afterwards, and I said, how can you do that? Just how embarrassed. I was mortified for him and the actress, because they were obviously doing this in front of an audience and it sounded so realistic. And he said, if you don't believe what you're doing, then the audience won't believe it either. And for me, that was like, oh my God, so that's acting. It's not about me pretending to be someone else with that kind of horrible thought of actually somebody's going to realize that I'm not really that person. I'm playing that person. I have to, if I want to become an actor, I have to become that person. I have to really find the truth in what makes that character tick, who they are. I have to really believe them. And so from that conversation with him, I went to drama school, obviously
Wow.
with the breast cancer as well. And so that sentence, I didn't quite realize it until I started doing the work that I'm doing now and have been for the last 4 years, is that one sentence, if you don't believe it, the audience won't believe it either, has come back to the fore for me working with other people. Because when people are being vulnerable, when they're speaking in front of an audience and they're telling an audience about what they're passionate about, what they want to share, the message they want to give, if they don't believe what they're saying, if they're not comfortable with their own story, if they're not comfortable showing up as with their own personality and speaking with their own voice, then that's why they're nervous, because they're waiting to be caught out. They're thinking, I'm not good enough. Somebody's going to realize I'm an imposter. And that's what makes people nervous. That's what makes people physically anxious. That's where the fear comes from, because they are worried about being judged and all of those things.
Yeah.
And for me, that one sentence, obviously from that, but I had to go through all of that. I had to do that work for myself.
Yep.
Having been through the breast cancer, seeing myself almost as a victim for about, for many years afterwards. I think it was about 8 years after my diagnosis that I was still being seen by the hospital for regular checkups. But I can remember after 8 years finally saying to them, look, I can't, I need to talk to someone about this. It's, it was too much of a shock. I was kind of keeping it all in. I was ashamed that it had happened to me. It was, there was lots of different things going on. So I went and saw a therapist and got it all out. And so you kind of then through that process realize that actually, until you take ownership of that,
yep,
until you say, right, that is who I am, that's my experience, and my experience can help other people. The stories that I have of my journey can be of benefit to other people.
yep.
So now when I'm working with people on their content to get them comfortable and confident speaking to an audience, I have to take them through that process.
Yeah, yeah. And even though, going into doing things like social media when you've never really done it much before, going into these community groups online, which you were doing in COVID to, get back into the real world, albeit virtually, and all of these things, it's the same approach, isn't it? I mean, you've still got to be confident in yourself. No doubt imposter syndrome can kick in at any time for any of us. It's about, being comfortable in yourself. And that's not, It's not just a switch on that, is there? Like you help people do it and that's from a speaking point of view, but it's across everything. It's about even coming on a podcast and talking.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of, when I very first started this, when I started Power to Speak and I was putting myself out there as a speaker presentation coach, I was thinking, well, my job is to teach people how to breathe, how to make sure they've got enough breath when they're speaking, how to use vocal variety, pitch, tone, and all of those things, how to get them performance ready, don't do a Michael Jackson on the stage, stand still, all of those things. But actually, once I started really doing that work with people, I realized that 70% of what I do is about that story. It is about that content, because it doesn't matter how well they breathe or how much vocal variety they use. Again, if they don't believe what they're saying, if they don't have faith in their own experiences, if they don't own their own story, then it doesn't matter what I do with them on their voice and their performance, they will still feel uncomfortable and they won't enjoy it. And the whole point for me is to get them excited and so that they're playful, so that they are enjoying the process. Otherwise, they won't do it.
I love that, owning your own voice. That's sort of I talk about that not necessarily in a speaking sense, but you own you've got your own uniqueness, and particularly if you're running a business, people will do business with you because they hopefully like or at least respect you, and that you're differentiated from everyone else. And I guess if you look at what you were doing, teaching presentation skills, breath, rhythm on, walking the stage, all of that sort of stuff. There's a million people that can do that. But to be able to get into someone to get them to find their own truth, through your unique experiences of doing that's almost your IP, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. People say, what's your differentiator? When you sort of do these marketing courses, as I've been doing, and that is mine. I can say, I came from an acting background, but why would that make me any different to another speaker trainer? And it's because the reason I love acting is because I love stories and I love people, and so I come at my work from that, the interest and the curiosity in what makes people tick, what motivates them. And that's, I think, my gift is to be able to say to people when they're telling me their story, when they're saying, look, this is what I need to do on a stage, this is what I need to do in my social media, anything. Because what I do crosses, like you were saying, crosses all boundaries. It doesn't matter what they're doing. If we can get that kind of foundation of their story out there, then they can pick and choose what parts of that story and their experience is going to be valid for the audience that they're talking to on that particular day. It can be adapted. So, as I say, we have to get that deep, and that's where I don't think, I'm not a trainer.
Yeah.
I don't train people how to speak. I actually support them and work with them to find the content that's going to excite them to share, because they've got confidence in it. They know that they've spoken it out loud to me. I've sort of helped them make it flow so that actually they can share it with an audience in whatever format they choose.
But early on, you probably thought yourself as a trainer a little bit more in the vocational side of things. The
maybe.
Yeah,
I think maybe because I'd been doing the teaching of kids and then teaching adults and working with actors. I used to teach an adult drama class before lockdown, and I used to do like a 2-hour weekly session with a group of, generally they were retired guys that wanted just to come in and have some fun and play and stuff, and that's what we did. We got into a space for 2 hours, and I'd get them to play. And these are people in their 50s, 60s, and they're just being playful, and they would come up to me at the end of the 2-hour session and say that was like therapy. And so I then understood, which is why I thought in lockdown I'm going to train to be a coach, because I'm not a therapist by any means, but I'm not a trainer. I'm
You go deeper.
Yes, there's more to it than just teaching people the rules.
What was it like going from being paid to do stuff to running your own business, particularly in, had you run your own business before? I mean, maybe you were doing freelance work previously.
I was a freelancer. So when you say 2009, 15 years ago, that's what I was doing. I was freelancing. My daughter was little, and so I was freelancing as a drama teacher, drama tutor.
Right.
And that's what I didn't particularly want to go back to. I didn't want to go back to doing that freelance stuff. I got a part-time job when my daughter was little as well, but in the art centre doing their arts development. But I didn't want to go back to that. I wanted to build a business.
Yeah. And that's, well, it is. And it's a different mindset. I mean, when you're freelancing, it's what's the next gig. When you're building a business, it's what am I offering? How can I position myself? Walk us through that. What sort of challenges did you have to overcome to, how many years has been now? When did you start 2020? So 4 years in, you started from scratch, basically. Walk us through to what you're doing now, because I said at the outset, it appears you have a portfolio business with lots of, different arms to it. Walk us through, what does it look like now, and what are some challenges you had to kind of overcome in those earlier days?
Well, in terms of the difference between being a freelancer and running and trying to establish a business, a lot of it was the marketing, because as a freelancer, I was working for organisations. So they were doing the marketing for me. They'd take me on as a tutor for an after-school club, or for adult workshops, or for whatever it was that I was doing. Or I'd go into schools. I was working with a theatre company that was sending me into schools to run workshops. So I was always contracted to them, and then they were the ones that were marketing and getting me the work.
Yep.
So that was quite difficult in the early days, which is why I started networking. Which, when I think about it, it was awful. It was horrible. I'd found a couple of places locally where I'd go and sit, and we'd do a breakfast somewhere in a cafe, and I'd sit around a table next to a table full of strangers, generally, women in business. There was lots of those, and then I'd sit there, and the woman next to me was trying to sell me her makeup product, or the color things, and I was thinking, this is not what I thought networking was. I thought networking was more collaborative and more creative. Plus, I was doing something a lot more creative then, in fact, more so than the speaking. I was trying to set up arts projects, and they just didn't get it. They didn't get me. And I was thinking, well, perhaps networking's not what I should be doing. I should be finding my work somewhere else. And I nearly gave up networking completely until I found You Are the Media, which was full of lots of people like me, and that's been really, really helpful. I think the networking was new to me, as was the marketing, and I think they are the two biggest things that I've had to really put myself out of my comfort zone, I suppose.
You Are the Media is it's a marketing and learning community, I suppose you'd call it, based in the Poole and Bournemouth area on the south coast of England, and got run by a friend of ours, Mark Masters, and he's building it and continuing to build it. You were in the early days when there weren't many people in it, but now it's a fully fledged England-wide community group that keeps on building. Online and offline. That's the thing. It's the secret. I've always said the secret of online communication is what you do offline, and the relationships that you build on that front. Walk us through some of the things that I know that you're doing. So you're doing public speaking coaching. What's happening? You've got a podcast, or you had a podcast. You went live streaming. You relaunched the podcast. What's the latest on that? And how did you find the process of starting a podcast from scratch?
Well, the podcast actually started before Power to Speak. So the podcast was 2020. It was coming towards the end of 2020, and over here in the UK, we'd been in and out of lockdown, as most of the world had.
Yep.
And it was around about September of that year, I think. I was on Zoom with the You Are the Media community, and Mark had managed to get a guy called Joseph Jaffe. Don't know if you met Joseph.
I know Joseph Jaffe. Oh, I know I've read one of his early books.
Yeah. And he was great. Mark got him in, and he was talking to us about podcasts. And at that point, he was doing a daily. I say it was a podcast, but it was almost like a TV show. It was
like
called
a live
Corona
stream.
TV, a live stream, which I'd never really known that you could actually do it with visuals and everything. I always assumed that a podcast was completely audio. So I stayed on after everybody had gone, and he stayed in the room with Mark and a couple of the other guys. And I was saying to him, I'd love to start a podcast. I mean, how do you do that? How do you do it? And so they kind of convinced me that I could. And so that September 2020, we were on Zoom. I'd never used Zoom before lockdown at all. And I just loved the idea that you had these two people side by side, and they were having a conversation. They could be in, opposite ends of the world, as we are.
Yes,
and
we are.
So I thought, I can just record Zoom. So I wanted to talk at that point about creativity. So the whole podcast was about how people used creativity for their work and their well-being. So it was called Creative Conversations, and I just started with people I knew, because obviously I was in a creative industry, so I knew lots of different people that were doing other stuff, and that's how it started. And it continued. It became Power to Speak once I started the Power to Speak business in 2021, and then I thought, no, I can't carry on spending an hour or so recording with somebody and then editing it, and then putting the intros in, and then I put an advert in the middle, and then I do an outro, and it was just taking too much time. So I thought, well, why don't I just go live? By then this was say 18 months, maybe nearly 2 years ago. I decided to take it live. So I do LinkedIn and YouTube. So I went to my YouTube channel, and I thought half an hour speaking about speaking, just everybody and anybody I know that's actually ever been on a stage and spoken. How did they feel? What was their process? Other speaker coaches, and it worked really well. But it got to about 18 months, and I thought it just needs a different format. There's something, it needs something else. So I stopped it at the end of July, and with every intention of starting it up again in January, and not knowing quite how or what it might be, but it will come back.
The live streaming, what did you like, it's amazing technology, the fact that we can, sit at our home office and beam out live to the world. And we can do it simultaneously across LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter or X, YouTube, Facebook, like 5 major channels we can do it.
Yep.
What was that like for you? That's a big jump. Like, it's a big jump from recording something and going back and editing it and having control over it. And with live streaming you've got control, because you could always say, I'm off air now. But walk us through that. What was that like, and how long did it take you to adapt? Because that's a big jump. I know people who are very accomplished who there's no way they'd get on a live. No way. And they are very professional, accomplished, entrepreneurial types. Yet you went out and did it. Did you have to force yourself to do it? Did you embrace it? How'd you get over that? Is there any tech issues?
You kind of have to embrace it, don't you? There wasn't much else I could do. But I think if I've learned nothing over the last 4 years since I've been sort of dabbling in all this, it's that done is better than perfect.
Yes.
So get over being perfect. It's never going to be perfect. And the other thing is just to, step outside your comfort zone. You've got to, if you don't step outside, or at least to the edge of your comfort zone, you're not growing. You're not achieving anything other than, what you did yesterday or the day before.
Yep.
So there was a little bit of that. I had been on other people's live podcasts. Mm-hmm. So I know I can talk. I'm never going to run out of conversation, and again, it comes back to, I'm interested in people. I'm curious about what makes people tick. So I knew that half an hour was never going to be long enough. I was never going to run out of conversation. The most frightening part of it, which always sort of threw me a little bit, was when I decided to go solo, to do solo episodes.
Yes.
Because that's just me. The other lovely thing about the live, though, is if I was going solo, I always made sure that that my mates knew, or the guys from your other media, people knew that I was going to be there. And what I enjoyed about the lives was that you could have comments. I could answer comments. People were putting comments in, and I could answer their questions as they were coming in, or I could refer to their comments. And so I was never totally on my own.
Yeah. But that's, again, thinking on your feet, your life. And I know that, depending on which platforms you went out to, but they stick around. Not everyone turns up live. Sometimes you might be, depending on the audience, you might not have too many in the live room, is my experience. Yeah. Even some of the top live streamers don't have a lot of people in their live room, but they get the updraft of viewers later. And people like live because it's raw. Like, it's raw. That's it. What you see is what you get, and we like that. Yeah. And it was nice. It was literally, it was, and it will be again, as I say, whether it'll go live. I am beginning to think maybe I will go back to recorded, only because you can get a bit deeper, and you can, you can spend a little bit more time. And there was the other thing of, like, I was at 4:00 on a Tuesday. That was my time. So it had to be then. So I had to make sure that people were available at that time. Of course,
so then
yes.
That was kind of an added, it wasn't quite challenge. As easy as to sort of say to people, well, actually, what time have you got available? Can we record? It was like,
Yep.
you have to be available at 4 o'clock on this day.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
that was a little bit of a bind, really. But apart from that, it was quite easy.
So walk us through from, not, you'd say that your personal brand, your profile, your reputation now has grown in 4 years. You're building an email list. You've had, growing your followers on social. You've had an audience across your live stream and your podcasting. You get invited on podcasts, and that's always, to me, an indication if people are inviting you on, you're obviously cutting through with your story and your message and being seen. What's, in terms of that side of things, I mean, what's that like now, building that profile across in multiple ways, I guess? Are you doing it strategically? Are you just putting yourself out there and hoping for the best? How do you approach social? Let's start with the email list that you're building and the email newsletter, because it feels to me that it's kind of like the diamond in the rough of everything you're doing.
Well, that's nice to hear.
Well, I'll add it as someone who subscribes and reads, right? So I can't remember what it probably used to be like, but it used to be like a newsletter that most people do, and we're doing this and whatever. Now, and I just can't really recall how long this gestation period has been, but for a considerable amount of time now, and I've noticed it, you're almost documenting your journey, your professional life. You add a layer, you peel a layer off of social stuff that you do, as in, this is, I think recently you went to Ireland, did you, for a wedding, and you did photos there. You're drawing people into your world, not just your business professional world, but also your personal world to a degree.
Yeah, and I think I've noticed that in terms of what people put on their socials, as a business owner, especially if you're a solopreneur, people want to know what you're up to. They don't want, there's that great thing, and I don't know who it was that said it, might even been you, Trevor, that pointed out to me that actually Elon Musk has got more followers than Tesla, and Richard Branson's got more followers than Virgin on any of those social media platforms. And because we're all interested in what other people are doing, and as much, and it feels strange when I do the newsletter not to do that. I mean, I do get newsletters from other people that are just purely about their business and what their business can do for you and that sort of thing. But it doesn't feel authentic to me to do that. So what I do, I mean, I don't want to bore people with my trials and tribulations and what I've done, what I had for breakfast and all of that. That's, I hope, is not what I do.
No, you don't.
What I try to do, and what I obviously do when I'm with clients, is find those stories and find those things that have happened in my week or the 2 weeks since the last newsletter went out that would be interesting and are relevant. So if I go to, I mean, the thing about Ireland was the fact that it took me 5 days to get home. I went for the weekend and ended up out there for 5 days because they cancelled all the flights. And obviously I missed a talk that I was doing one morning, and people were expecting me to be here and I couldn't make it. So it kind of was relevant, but it was also that kind of chunk of like, this is what my month has been like. It's been crazy. Yeah. And my daughter graduated, and I don't need much of an excuse to actually put a photograph of me and my daughter in anything. So those bits are lovely. But otherwise, what I like to put in there is, it might be, the stunt guys. So I've been teaching stunt trainees how to act for the last sort of 18 months, doing a 5-day course with them. So that's great because that interests people of something that I'm doing about Pinewood Studios. It's people want to hear that stuff. But in that, rather than just saying, look what I've been doing, aren't I great? It's like, well, what can I teach you from what I've learned in this week, or what I've taught them in terms of speaking? So
yes, of course.
Yeah. So in the 5 days that I'm with them, we do this. How is that relevant to what you do as a business owner? On the day 3, we do this. How is that relevant? Yes, they're actors, they're stunt performers. but actually this is relevant to you. So whatever it is that I do try to make some kind of learning from it.
Yeah.
I try to put something in there that people can take away.
And that it's a great lesson for anyone who's creating content. That's whether it's social, whether you're blogging. Excuse me, early morning for me. It's doing a newsletter. I mean, it's all content, and from that, obviously you do stuff on social. I think it's probably more LinkedIn, and there's always chunks from the newsletter. So you're repurposing, I guess, the newsletter. Would you call the newsletter your main channel now? I like to call it, have you got a BBC One, the mothership channel? Would that be your BBC One?
Yeah, I think so. I think I would have said before it was the podcast, but since I've not, and the newsletter came out of the podcast. It was because I was doing the podcast every 2 weeks. I was putting out a recorded episode every 2 weeks, and I started the newsletter in a way to promote that, and hoping that I would get thousands and thousands of subscribers, which I've not, and I'm nowhere near that. I'm not even up to 200, I don't think. But I know that the people that have subscribed are really interested in what I do, and I get replies from that email, which I never expected to from a newsletter. I thought I'd just send it out, people would read it or not read it, but actually it's nice. I'm building relationships with the people that are actually on that list.
Look, I love that, Jackie. I mean, it's and we all get sucked into we want to go viral and the dopamine hit and want to be popular and massive amounts of followers. But the reality is the people who are doing that often are probably gaming the system anyway. The algorithm is against you, and it's hard to build an email subscriber list. But there's no point having thousands on the list if they don't open it.
True.
You're the only one who knows that, or you could probably go and tell the world, but there's no point. And I'm reading a lot of articles of late from people who are of the philosophy and the mindset that you can do better with a smaller list, and small is relevant or relative, where people are engaged with you on an ongoing, regular, weekly, fortnightly basis, versus a big list where people just don't open it. And it's, you can go around saying, I've got thousands on the list, but what does that actually mean? You're trying to build an ongoing, sustainable business that suits your lifestyle, and you have an impact on people's lives, and so you want to get the right people. By the time they get to you, I would say that whether you're coaching them or whether I'll get you to talk about your Speak Like a Speaker club, but they already know you and they've been following you. Would that be fair? I'm guessing on that, but it's an educated guess.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I suppose really I don't advertise the newsletter enough. I need to work out how to do that. But the people that are coming to it seem to have found me organically.
Yes.
And obviously, this, as you say, the speaker club is a way of sort of building on that list as well.
Walk us through that Speak Like a Speaker club.
Again, that came out of You Are the Media. Lovely John Jockham. I'll give him a name check. Obviously, I'd been talking to the guys there, and they kind of knew what I did, and obviously having those conversations in that community. And I think it was John said it would be great to be able to get in a room and maybe like a speaker club kind of thing. And so I said, yeah, well, okay, I'll find a venue and we'll see how it goes. And I think we'd be up to 2 years in March. We'll have done. So yeah, just over 18 months or so it's been going. But it's a really lovely core of people. So we meet for 2 hours in a pub room of an evening of Wednesday, Thursday evening, and there's generally only about 8 to 10 people. I've got quite a few people on the list, but they kind of intermingle, and people can't turn up one week, but other people will. So, but actually, it's a really lovely group of supported. Everybody supports each other. That everybody wants to get in front of their audience. They want to practice speaking out loud in front of other people. I spend sort of 20 minutes half an hour doing a warm up and maybe tips and techniques, different things that come from my actor training. And then, so I get people improvising and playing and doing all of that, which they hate, but actually they hate when I tell them that's what we're going to be doing, but actually they quite enjoy it. And then they get a chance to do like a 1 minute lucky dip, take a question out and answer the question. You've got a minute to answer that. And then if there's anybody that's got a talk, or I've had somebody come and do a comedy set they wanted to practice, which is fabulous. Or if anybody's got a presentation or a talk, quite often, in fact, I've had a couple of them that have literally just put something together for the speaker club, an idea that they've had that they just want to try out. I've done feedback. I did a talk in April that I wanted some feedback on. So I brought in my slides and said, can you give me some feedback? What do you think? Does this work? Does it not work? So it's just been a really lovely, and that's what everybody seems to say is just a really lovely supportive group where everybody's kind of in the same boat, but everyone enjoys it.
So what I'm hearing, Jackie, is you have a crack at things.
I do.
but a lot of people have these ideas and they actually don't do it. A lot of people who'd be in your space, someone would say, oh, why don't you do a club and we can all get together? Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. But you did it. And live streaming, oh, that sounds like an idea. I'll do it. Putting out a fortnightly newsletter. Yeah, I'll do that. Do you find yourself saying yes to things like that more so now than you did 4 years ago?
Yes.
And why is that?
Having said that, it's funny because I did the talk I did in April, and again, it goes back to You Are the Media, I suppose. It's a thing called Failed Nights. I don't know if you've heard of the Failed Nights evening before Creator Day that You Are the Media do. And I was offered a 10, 15-minute spot to talk about my failures. And so I decided to talk about my failure to win an Oscar was the whole kind of premise. And obviously it was kind of lighthearted, how have you learned from your failures kind of thing. But in that I spoke about my journey, and it was sort of lighthearted. So how I'd auditioned, how I'd gone to drama school, how I'd auditioned for things, how I'd started out as a fashion designer and then into the theatre and then into acting, going for auditions, it not being quite as I expected and coming out the other end. And actually it was quite hysterical in lots of ways. It was quite a funny talk to do. I really enjoyed doing it. But there was a point at the end, and that was the thing that I took to the speaker club. It's like, yes, this is a romp through my disasters as an actor, but what's the point? What is the audience going to take away from it? And actually there is no failure, only feedback. But what came out of that, and to your point, was that people were saying to me, where does this come from? This kind of need to keep doing stuff, keep trying stuff. And to be honest, I don't know. I don't know whether it's just I've always, even as a kid, I always had my parents kind of gave me the space to be able to try things out. And I suppose I was afraid of failure. Nobody likes to fail, but actually, what's the worst that can happen? You move onwards and upwards, and if it doesn't work, try something else. But if you're not having fun, what's the point?
Yeah. So plenty of lessons from our conversation, Jackie. Let me try and encapsulate a few of them. One is have a crack, have a go at things. What can happen? What was that saying? Is no such thing as failure, only feedback.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world. and by trying new things, if you've been in the trenches for a long time and you've got these connections, experiences, skill sets, you're probably in a better position than most people. Often it's only our mindset holding us back because, when you're more experienced and you're staying up to date and you're doing stuff all the time, you probably come at it from a different angle and you've got your own voice. I think that's the key, if you've been working in business for, 2-3 decades, you're going to have more stories to tell than a 21-year-old life coach who has not much to offer, but, will look glitzy and glamour and play that game. And that's the strength that you can have once you're experienced and you've been out there. I guess building different models, different, you've got the Speaker Club, you coach, you do training at Pinewood Studios, teaching the stunt people on how to act. Multiple different things. You got the podcast maybe coming back, the live stream, the newsletter. But it's also about, do you think you're still finding your voice? Is that something you don't ever stop doing?
I don't think you do. I think, I love every day's a school day. You never stop learning. Every day you're learning something new. And now I love getting on stages myself. Yep. Obviously, I come from a performing background, of course, but I'd never been on stage as myself, really. I'd always been on stage as a character, which is easier because you're playing somebody, you're being somebody else. So when I started teaching people how to do that and working with people how to get on stage and be themselves, I'd not really done that before. So that was the next step. It's like, well, if I'm expecting people to do that, I need to be able to do that myself. So that's how I'm putting myself out there as a speaker. So there's always something new to learn. There's always somewhere new to go. And here I am, at an age where most people are thinking about slowing down. And I'm so excited that I can't imagine ever stopping. Do you know, maybe it's in the genes because my dad is a stuntman at 85 and he's still working. He's going for a fitting this week. So I think I have him to look to, and there's always something to do, always something to learn.
That's a pretty rough gig at 85. It's a pretty rough gig at 25. And just one last thing, we've touched on it. It's been a theme throughout. And you've touched on it more so than me, but owning your voice and telling your stories and not being afraid to do it and to, I use the technical term, putting yourself out there, but with your stories, that's the competitive advantage you've got when you have stories to tell and you've got experiences and there is a narrative of your life and how you came to being what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Do you find it now easier to tell stories? I mean, I know you're teaching people to do it themselves. How do you do that now? Is that just something that you're always on the lookout for? I know you said before you're curious, so you're seeing these stories. But is there a conscious thing now to tell stories more today than ever before?
I suppose I have more opportunities to tell stories now than I did before. I've always enjoyed telling. That's a childhood thing for me. My family for some reason were always recounting something that had happened, or I just remember sitting around, like I can remember my grandmother being ill in bed. I think she'd slipped a disc or something, so she was literally there for weeks. And as kids, we went round with my aunts and uncles, and we all sat around in the bedroom just telling stories. Or my dad would come back from somewhere, and we'd have Sunday lunch, and you're sat around the table telling stories. Yep. And so it's always been part of my life, and I suppose that's why I loved acting, and that's why I did that. But we are all our own unique selling point, and it's those stories that make us unique, because we all have had a different journey. We've all been through different things, and people say to me, "Oh, I can't tell my story. I'm, people who'd want to hear that. I don't want to air my dirty linen in public and all that." It's not about that. You're not telling stories to elicit sympathy. It's not to brag. It's not. There's no point telling a story to an audience unless it's relevant to them. They're not going to want to listen, because they're only thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about you. Yep. As the wonderful John Burkhart told me in a podcast conversation I had with him, the audience don't care about you, up there on the stage. They only care about themselves. So there's no point you telling them, how awful an upbringing you had and how terrible it was. And they don't want to know that. Your third marriage didn't work out. And they're only interested in how you can help them.
Yep.
So find those stories. Your stories are unique, but know that they are relevant to somebody, and find those are the stories that you want to be telling.
perfect note to finish up on, Jackie Goddard. Thank you very much. Where can people find you online and subscribe to your newsletter, etc.?
Ooh, well, I'd love people to subscribe to my newsletter. If you can go to powertospeak.co.uk, that's my website, and there will be a pop-up, and I need to work out whether I should still have that, as they don't seem to be very popular these days. There is a pop-up, or there is a tab that says newsletter. Go and sign up there, and obviously you can find out about me there. LinkedIn is the place that I kind of live when I'm really doing social media. So Jackie Goddard, Power to Speak on LinkedIn, but I am on Facebook and Insta as well.
And you're building a YouTube. We didn't even get into that. We haven't got time now, but you're building a YouTube channel as well.
Yes, there's 281 videos on my YouTube channel.
So
all of
you're
the
building that.
Are on there.
Yep.
Yeah. So you can go and look at all the lives are up there, and all of the podcasts going back 4 years are all up there.
Terrific, Jackie. Always love chatting with you and your enthusiasm and following your journey that just continues to power to speak along. And thank you for being a guest here on Crank the Third.
Thank you very much for having me. Loved it.